Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to wearefree.tv, the channel of the people, by the people, for the people, where we interview different people from around the world about different subjects to do with anything really, from aliens, channeling, science, alternative medicine, alternative treatments, new age subjects, anything which is kind of different and that doesn't really get much support on mainstream channels. This is where people talk about these subjects freely, as long as it's not instigating violence or talking badly about anything else. We're fine with anything. So thank you for watching, and thank you for your donations. If you wish to donate, then our details are shown up here. Also, please do join our Telegram group, which is No Censorship TV. And also, you're welcome to go to our website, which is wearefree.tv, click on Join Us, and then click on put your email, and then click Send, and you'll be added to our mailing list. Also, when you do get to our website, you might end up on our Hebrew Israeli version. So just look for the EN for English on top, click on that, and then you'll see the English version. So thank you very much for all that. And now we could move on to today's interview, which is an interesting one indeed. My guest is Julian Treasure, and his title is a sound and communication expert, author, and 5 times TED speaker. The name of the interview is How to Be Heard. We're going to talk about effects of sound, listening skills, talking skills, TED Talk, Vocal Toolbox, and powerful speaking. So, hello there, Julian. How are you today?
Hello, Michael. I'm well, thank you. Very well up here in Orkney, which is a set of islands off the north coast of Scotland.
Nice. Sounds like a warm place.
Warm, no. Definitely not as warm as Israel. No, it's we're lucky if we get 23 degrees in the summertime.
Wow.
Never gets too cold either. So we're quite far north. We're about on a level with Oslo.
Amazing, but it must be beautiful though, the scenery and everything.
As you can see behind me, it is absolutely beautiful.
Amazing. Brilliant. So perhaps you could tell us briefly about yourself. I mean, who are you, and how did you get to be doing what you're doing, and what is your life purpose, etc., in a nutshell?
Well, I had 15 years running a marketing agency producing customer magazines in the UK. I sold that, and then I started a company called the Sound Agency, which was really bringing into play the whole other half of me, which is listening. I'm a musician, have been since I was very young, and I think musicians listen to the world quite intently anyway. I was conscious that the world was noisy and not very pleasant, and the question was, since most of that noise was being made by organizations, does that matter? Does anybody care? Does it have effects? So I did a lot of research, and yes, sound affects us profoundly, and most organizations are simply unaware of this. They don't design the way they sound. You know, they spend a lot of money on how they look, particularly in marketing, almost nothing on how they sound, and yet it's having these profound effects on us.
Okay.
So along the way of running that company, I got to do some TED Talks. Starting in 2009, I did 5 successive TED Talks, which have now been seen by, I think, 125 million people. I wrote a book called Sound Business in 2007, and another one called How to Be Heard a couple of years ago, which is, I'm very proud to say, won a couple of awards as best audiobook in the world on business. So
amazing.
I think you could say sound is my thing, particularly focusing more recently on human communication, speaking skills, and especially listening skills. So you asked what my purpose is. My purpose is twofold: to make the world sound beautiful and to persuade everybody that I can to take listening seriously. It's a crucial life skill and so often ignored.
Very true. I know from myself. I mean, when I learned to listen, I was like shocked by how pleasant it is, because I used to just transmit. You know, I used to sit in a conversation and not really listen to what the other person is saying, just wait till I could start saying what I want to say. It's more like attacking them than listening to them. And then when I started listening, I was like, wow, this is fun. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's amazing what you can learn. And what you've just described is something I call speech writing, where you're writing your next brilliant bit of monologue while this noise is going on in front of you. That's the other person speaking. And it's amazing, if you treat every person you meet as an opportunity to learn something and you really listen to them, how rich life can become.
Yes, indeed. So can you tell us about the two strands of work that you're involved in?
Sure. Well, one is the sound agency, which, as I say, I started it in 2003. So it's quite venerable now as an agency. We've been working all that time around the world for major brands, and particularly focusing on designing sound in commercial and other important spaces, places like shopping malls, airports, receptions, hotels, places like this, often removing music before anybody starts thinking that we are one of those companies that just pipes music everywhere. We often remove music. And I love music. I am a musician, but it is the most misapplied sound in the world at the moment. Often very poorly thought out, inappropriate, played through a bad quality sound system, and just not doing the job it needs to do. So we create a lot of generative soundscapes. That is to say, sound that's made live by a computer. It's a texture. And we have a product now called MOODSONIC, which is specifically designed to enhance well-being and productivity in open plan offices, where noise is the number one problem in the world.
Yeah.
So that's one half of my life, is the sound agency. The other half, which really came about through the TED Talks, was that I started getting calls to go and speak all around the world about the skills of speaking and listening, which is so important, whether you're talking about relationships at home or relationships at work, or your outcomes, your success at work. How persuasive can you be? How well can you sell? How well can you lead people and inspire people? All of that comes down to those skills of speaking and listening, which, if you think about it, crazily, we don't teach in school. We teach reading and writing, but we assume that kids are going to pick up these things, but they're often confused with capabilities. Hearing is a capability. We can all hear, or at least most people can, if you haven't got some sort of damage to your hearing. That's a capability. You don't have to think about it. It just works. Listening is a skill.
Yeah.
It's a skill that you can practice. It's a skill that you can master. And my goodness, if you master it, what an advantage it creates in life for you. Because as Hemingway said, most people never listen.
Yeah. So two things I wanted to ask you from what you just said. Just what a remark is that they don't teach us so many things in school apart from that, and they teach us such a load of rubbish of things that we will never remember, which is just ridiculous. And that's why schools are basically bankrupt, and very soon they probably won't even exist, thank God. So, and you mentioned about removing sound. So can you give us like three simple examples, like, well, in a shopping mall, the street, and what else, like a public place, or we could think a school. So what would you do in a shopping mall? You'd remove the sound, the music, and what would you do? Like play these crackling noises or waves of the ocean and wind and things like that? Just a few ideas.
The big question is what's appropriate. When you're designing sound for a physical space, there are four things to think about. There's the acoustics. So if you're in a big echoey room, like a shopping mall with all hard surfaces, it's pretty hard to make a nice sound. You really have to work at it. So architects are just starting to understand now that they can use acoustic materials to make spaces more pleasant for us to be in, designing with their ears as well as their eyes, which is one of my TED Talks, actually. It's exactly about that topic. Because, architects train for like 5 years, and they're lucky if they spend a week, sometimes even only a day, on sound in that whole time. So not surprising, they focus very much on how things look, not how they sound. So acoustics is the first thing to think about. Second, you've got noise. So again, if you use, you also said a street. That's pretty hard because at the moment we have a lot of traffic in streets, which is making a lot of noise, diesel engines. Even when we all go electric, which is happening quite rapidly around the world, you're still going to have air brakes on buses. You're still going to have tire noise on the tarmac and horns and so forth. Streets tend to be pretty noisy, and it's very hard to remove that sound. So you really have to work around it. And then the third thing, after removing noise, which of course you can do in a shopping mall, you can silence squeaking escalators or, mute a banging door. These kind of noises are very irritating for people, and they set up stress reactions in us. They create cortisol, noradrenaline release, and long-term noise exposure has been shown absolutely clearly to be directly related to heart disease, stroke, and so forth, elevated risk of heart attack from being in noise for a long period of time.
But does it make us buy less and shop less? That's the real question.
Well, yes, absolutely it does. We've shown this many times in shopping malls. I mean, think about it. If you have a shop and you have a terrible smell in there, people are going to leave.
Yeah.
That's obvious. Well, it's the same with sound. If you have a shop that's really noisy and you're playing, really inappropriate music, maybe loud through a bad sound system, it's distorted, everybody's having to shout, there's a lot of noise going on because of the acoustics and maybe some machinery in there. That's not a nice environment. People will leave, or they will leave faster.
I actually remember in London, walking into some shops that are considered like, cool and funky, and it's just loud music, you know what I mean? Like proper dance music. And I remember I like that kind of music, in a rave, but not when I'm shopping, for clothes. And it really irritated me. And I was thinking, well, obviously they know what they're doing. So do you know that kind of approach?
They don't know what they're doing. Unfortunately, it's flying in the face of all the research. The research generally shows that if you play slow-paced sound in a store, people slow down. That means dwell time goes up. And every retailer knows that dwell time is related to sell time. People buy more. You and I buy more if we're in a place for a longer period of time. And not only that, but the quality of the sound can affect what we buy. There's a famous study by some academics where they had two gondola ends, one with French wine, one with German wine, and they just alternated the music condition. German music one day, French music the next day. On the French music days, people bought 5 bottles of French wine to every one of German wine. May not be surprising, it does sell more. But on the German music days, people bought 2 bottles of German wine to every 1 bottle of French wine. So that's a massive shift in purchasing behavior. And this wasn't conscious. The people surveyed hadn't even spotted the music. It's not, German music, therefore I shall buy German wine.
Amazing.
It's subconscious. So that is how powerfully sound affects all of us. And that's why every organization really needs to think about the sound of its retail spaces or showrooms, the sound of its corporate reception, the sound of its offices. How is that affecting people's health and productivity? I mean, it is a disaster in most open plan offices where people can't think, they can't work. It's, supposedly fine for collaboration, although the latest research is now showing that in noisy open plan offices, people actually send more emails even to people sitting right next to them because they don't like being overheard. So, the jury's out on whether open plan is even good for collaboration, but it is certainly terrible for concentration, contemplation, solo working, and so forth.
Yeah. Okay. So what can you tell us about this MOODSONIC product of yours?
Well, that's what MOODSONIC is expressly designed to cater for. It helps with privacy because even nature sound, and often this will be based on water sound or other natural sound. So it's biophilic. And there's a wealth of evidence now to show that biophilic sound is basically good for us.
What's that?
Reduces stress. Sound of nature.
Okay.
Biophilic sound. Biophilia is a huge fashion and trend now in architecture, bringing the outside inside. You may have seen plant walls or indoor plantings, that kind of stuff. Whether it's images or actual plants, it is being shown now that these things make people feel better, feel good.
Aquarium walls.
Could be fish if you want to go that way.
And waterfalls.
It's quite. That's quite expensive inside a building, but it is done. People do it. So those kind of things can really help. It's important to be kind of congruent and sensible about this, not just ram something in and expect people to be happy and healthy. The whole sensory experience, all 5 senses, need to be carefully designed to work together. And there are people like Professor Charles Spence at Oxford University or Dr. Sally Augustin over in America who are really working hard on all of this kind of stuff and showing us the way. If you line the senses up and you produce environments which are healthy and which foster concentration and working, then you get a tremendous result. It's called super additivity, and you get big increases in well-being, in productivity, and in happiness.
So what about productivity? Can you give us examples from the commercial world? Like, for example, a company that had this much production a year, then they called you in, you installed the system, and the employees started working more efficiently, and the company doubled their profits, something like that?
Well, it's very hard to track these things through because, of course, there are many different influences going on. And indeed, MOODSONIC only was launched last year, so we're quite new. So far, we have installations in America, in Australia, in India, and in Europe. And early reports from all these installations are fantastic. I mean, 90+% satisfaction ratings from the people in the office, delight from the management because of the way that people are feeling, and the whole atmosphere has been greatly improved. Doubtless, in years to come, we'll have stats as everything flows through the system, but it's not going to be an overnight thing, and it's very hard to measure the productivity of people in different jobs in an office, of course, because you're comparing apples with pears a lot of the time. But I have no doubt that, for example, the one thing that does do that is the Leesman Index, which anybody running an office is probably familiar with. It's got like 1 million completed surveys around the world. It just says which things are important to you in your happiness and effectiveness in the office, and how satisfied are you with them. And I'm pretty confident that as the offices with MOODSONIC in start to filter through into Leesman, we'll see the effects very clearly there.
I know Google are known to have these really cool office environments, with bean bags and pool tables and PlayStations. I'm sure they also invest heavily in sound.
They don't actually.
They don't.
And no. And I've been over to Google in California. They took me into a canteen, and the decibel levels in there were well over 100. You couldn't hear yourself bellow. It was not the most relaxing place in the world. They've expanded so fast that they've had to take on a lot of office space sort of almost willy-nilly. So it's been very difficult for them to design an office experience. Now they've got these new squomes, which have been designed by Bjarke Ingels over in Mountain View, I think it is. And it'll be interesting to see what they sound like, because they are huge glass spaces with no floors. That is not a recipe for good sound. Think of a cathedral.
What do you mean no floors? So what do they step on?
Well, there is a floor that but I mean, there are no floors.
Floors, as in like it's just huge, like a cathedral.
No stories, just enormous open spaces. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that plays out. And unfortunately, I mean, I know Bjarke Ingels a little bit from TED, and he's an absolutely brilliant architect. So I'm sure they've thought about it. But it'll be quite interesting in that one. That's the first time they've really been able to design from the ground up, in the way that, for example, Apple have with their campus, or other big companies have, Microsoft in Seattle.
Yeah.
So
they have plenty
but
of money.
Most of them don't. They don't think about sound very much, and they don't. It's only recently, really, that the research has come through showing how powerful sound can be in the office environment.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the subject of your first TED Talk was the 4 effects of sound. Can you please tell us about it?
Yes. What, the talk or the content of it? Oh, I can do both. I mean, it was a very nerve-wracking thing. They gave me, I think, 8 minutes, something like that, on the TED stage back then in 2009. And when you stand on the TED stage, it is quite nerve-wracking. You look out into the audience, and oh, there's Jeff Bezos, and oh, there's Bill Gates, and so forth. So it's not your average audience. And I rehearsed the heck out of that thing. I was very passionate to put across to people that sound was so powerful. And I think I did a decent job of that. And then I got to do some more TED Talks after it. So in case anybody's wondering, the 4 effects of sound are physiological. Sound changes your heart rate, your breathing, your hormone secretions, even your brain waves. So a sudden sound will make us jump, we'll get stress reaction, or sound like gentle surf, for example, will slow down your heart rate. Anybody who has trouble sleeping, it's a really good sound to go to sleep to. And then the second way is psychologically. Just think of music. Of course it does. Sound can change our moods. And birdsong actually has been shown to make people feel secure, because we've learned over hundreds of thousands of years that when the birds are singing happily, normally things are safe and we feel comfortable. The third way is cognitive, and we've just talked about that. And you asked about the research. I mean, the research shows that noise in offices can reduce people's productivity by 2/3, down to 1/3 of your normal working ability in a quiet space. Amount. Absolutely enormous. It's massive, and it is a huge problem. It's the number one problem, as I said, in global offices now. So cognitively, sound changes how well we can think. And we all know that, it's will you shut up? I'm trying to think here. So that kind of response. And then the final way is behaviorally. And I just mentioned that study about the French and German wine. Sound changes what we do and how fast we do it very much. So it's all around us all the time. And yet we're actually, most of us, pretty unconscious of sound. We'll stand on a street corner bellowing over somebody drilling. And I see people doing that and I think, why don't you just move? But we don't. We just stand there shouting and assuming that we can't change it.
Yeah.
So I think part of my message really is to become conscious of the power of sound, and then you can improve your own health and productivity and happiness by taking responsibility for the sound around you. Do move if it's unpleasant. You wouldn't want to propose marriage in a really noisy Starbucks or something, probably. That's not a great environment, if you're shouting at somebody. So you want to move to somewhere that's appropriate. Always try and get the environment, the context to be appropriate, especially for important communications.
Yeah.
And then you can actually take on board the way sound's affecting you. Design your house. Go through the rooms in your house and close your eyes and listen and say, is this the most powerful, effective, and positive sound I could have in this room, given what I want to do in here?
Yeah.
So that's a great practice as well.
Definitely. So you said the four things. First one is physical, psychological, cognitive, and behavioral. So physical, I remember being again in a very loud party, and I remember there was this German doctor there, and he was shouting at the DJ and saying the bass is really bad for the heart, and he was explaining the medical aspects of why bass is bad for the heart, the vibrations or whatever. And then we have the cognitive, which not cognitive. We said psychological. I mean, I'm imagining all these meditation, on Google, on YouTube. You have all these meditations, with sounds of waterfalls and birds and nature. The sound of water is huge in relaxation and all that, isn't it?
It is, yes. And it's a myth, of course, that water makes everybody want to pee. Otherwise, every time you walk by a river, you'd want to pee. That's not true. It's a kind of old wives' tale. And it depends on the kind of water. When you're talking about biophilic sound and its effects on us, there are lots of sounds that can help us to think. Birdsong's very good, incidentally, because it's nature's alarm clock as well. So when the birds are singing, it's time to be awake. And it's also a calming sound. So you feel awake and yet, calm and secure. So very good for working to, and very easy for us to put aside. The birds have been here way longer than we have. So we've evolved to birdsong, and we know how to work or do anything while it's going on. You're not listening to it, you're aware of it, but it's easy to put aside.
Yeah.
Unlike human conversation, which is the number one most distracting sound of all, because we're programmed to decode language. You have no earlids, you may have noticed. Nothing you can do about it unless you put headphones on. And that's what a lot of people do in offices, but then they're locked away in a little bubble. So it rather negates the point of having an open plan office.
I remember working in an office, also, in London, and people, my boss or the manager, I was like a manager's assistant, and he used to say, well, I can shut down. I don't listen to other people's conversations. And I was like, how can he do it? I'm sitting there trying to work, and these two girls beside me are talking. So I can't not hear the words and the context of what they're saying and the logic. It's like, God, I can't not hear. And he used to work, and then when I used to say, Dave, he used to go, Yeah, as if I awoke him for this sleep, and he didn't hear me. You know what I mean? He doesn't, and he can really either he was pretending to be able to shut down and not hear other people's conversations, or he really was able to. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, we won't know. Everybody is different, and I have to put a little proviso on everything I say about sound, which are general rules, but everybody's different. So it may well be there's somebody out there who works really, really well to loud death metal. That wouldn't be me, but maybe there is somebody.
Yeah.
So you have to find out what works for you, and if you're somebody who can block out conversation, very difficult to do, I would say. But if that is you, well, good luck to you, and then you can work in noisy offices without a problem. Not true of most people, however. Most of us find conversation very, very difficult. Any sound that's intermittent is disturbing. Like you imagine a door that bangs every couple of minutes. I mean, by the end of the day, you want to go and murder the next people who comes through it. And it sounds like alarm sounds, ringing phones, babies crying. These are sounds that are very uncomfortable for us because they're saying, do something, and we can't do anything about it unless it's our phone or our baby, of course, in which case you can. So those kind of sounds are very, very disturbing psychologically and cognitively.
A few people told me that they study better with the radio on.
Well, that may be true. You can replace one disturbing sound with another. For example, if you're in a noisy office and you put headphones on, many people will play music on their headphones. Well, that's replacing one disturbance with another, a much more pleasant one, admittedly, one you might enjoy. But music's main job is to be listened to. There's not many recording studios where people hunched over a mixing desk going, let's make something nobody wants to listen to. That's the intention of music is largely to be listened to. So you've got this stuff in your ears going, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. Unless it's really slow moving like ambient music or very, very repetitive like trance music, it's pretty difficult to ignore music. If it's got vocals, classical music, most of it very difficult to ignore because it's calling for attention. No, you'll have a nicer time. You may work at all. I mean, kids might say to you, I can only work with music on. Maybe they'll work at all, and that's probably a step forward. And they'll have a nicer time doing it, but you will not be more productive per minute listening to music than you would be listening to other people's voices, really. As I say, the best sounds, if you want something that's going to block out disturbance, birdsong, running water, those kind of things, are very, very good, because once you've heard for a little bit, you set it aside, you're not conscious of it at all, and it works very well. I'm not a big fan, by the way, of sound masking systems, which make a kind of white noise or pink noise sound into offices. It just sounds like going on all day. The research is now showing that actually raises stress levels in people. It's like when the air conditioning goes off at 6 p.m., everybody's shoulders suddenly go down 3 inches. Everybody goes, oh, didn't even know that was on.
Yeah.
So you can block things out, but they still have an effect on you.
Yeah. And about the behavioral, I just remembered that in London underground stations, in some of them, like the problematic ones, where there's a lot of violence, they started playing classical music because apparently it reduces crime.
I think 350 tube stations eventually. And the results were stunning. It reduced attacks on staff, it reduced violence, it reduced abuse quite dramatically. So, classical music tends to be associated with quality, polite behavior. It's also been shown that when you play classical music in a wine shop, people buy more expensive bottles of wine. They don't buy more bottles, but they buy more. A little bit of Vivaldi. Let's have a good bottle tonight. That kind of effect.
What can I say? Human nature. You can't beat it. And so, what are the skills of listening and speaking?
Well, they are first and foremost skills. And I think the biggest door to go through is the door of consciousness, to understand that these two things are skills. You didn't get taught them at school, which is a travesty in my book, but you can learn them now. You can really master them. In terms of speaking, you can master what you say, the content, how you design it, and you can master the way you say it. Your voice, I talk about there being a vocal toolbox. It's the subject of my last TED Talk, the one that's got huge viewership. I think it's the seventh most watched TED Talk of all time now.
We'll get to that soon, yeah.
So that, I mean, it's interesting to me though, also that TED Talk on speaking has got more than 5 times as many views as my TED Talk on listening, which really drives me, because listening is the most important basic skill. You know, you can be a clever speaker, but if you're not listening to people, what's the point? You know, in order to understand people, in order to inspire them, and in order to connect with them and have a relationship, you need to be listening to them. Sort of shouting over people, even if you do it very cleverly, isn't going to achieve a great result in the long term, certainly.
Okay.
So they're both crucial. They're both crucial skills, but I would say listening comes first, speaking comes after. And I talk about the 4 C's of listening. The first C of listening is consciousness. In other words, being conscious that you're doing something. It's work. It's a task, you know, it's effort. Sadly, ladies and gentlemen, watching this, listening is work.
I do it every day. Sorry, I'm doing it right now. And I didn't listen to the TED Talk. So yeah, sorry.
So there you go. Work. If you're conscious that you're doing something, it's not like hearing. It's not an unconscious capability. And if you're not conscious that you're doing something, you're probably not listening very well. You know, we're very used to in the modern world faux listening or partial listening. You know, no, I am listening to you. No, you're sending a text. That's not listening. That's doing something else. So we often do that. The second C is compassion. That is to say, listening to understand somebody else. That it's a wonderful thing. I mean, I always say conscious listening is the doorway to understanding in the world. And I think never have we needed that more than we do now in your country, in my country, in America. Just look at the politics that's going on. Politicians go off and have talks. I really wish they'd go off and have listens instead. You know, I think the world would be a better place. They're all talk, talk, talk. So compassion is a big part, I think, of listening. The third C is commitment, which is to say, actually putting things down. I wonder, dear viewers, when's the last time you put everything down and totally focused on the person talking in your family or in your work? You know, we're so time poor, we're so driven, you know, we have so many things to do now. The internet has accelerated the pace of everything. We're always trying to do 2 or 3 things at once. It's an amazing gift to give to somebody, to put everything down, look at them, and just give them that gift of your total attention. Commitment is underneath all good listening. And the final C, which is kind of the secret weapon of listening, I suppose, is curiosity. Treating everybody, as I said earlier, as an opportunity to learn something, then it's a wonderful way, you know, not judging books by the cover, not I know what you're going to say next, not making those assumptions about people. And if you're in a long-term relationship, here's a lovely way to listen. Listen to your partner as if for the first time. Try and wipe the slate. Get rid of all those presuppositions. Oh, there you go again, doing that thing you do. And try and go back and listen as if for the first time, as if you've just met them. And it can really get a bit of the luster back in the relationship.
Yeah, well, I could say about the first thing, the being conscious while speaking. As an ex-weed marijuana smoker, one of the damages it did to me is that it developed the ability of speaking or having a conversation without having a clue what the other person was saying. I could just go like this, like, and I was somewhere else. I had no idea what the person was saying at all. And after quitting weed, I realized that it stayed. That behavior stayed. And I was able to, I noticed that I'm dreaming when people are talking to me. I don't care what they're saying to me. And obviously it took me many years to kind of fix that. And I mean, look at me now. Now I really have to listen to every word that's being said. And it's not easy. I'll be honest with you. In real life, I'm not at all like, if you were to meet me in a pub, I'd be talking all over you all the time and, you know, and breaking into your words and like, you know, really horrible compared to how I'm here. But here I'm forcing myself to listen and to be the interviewer. And it's cool, practice. You know. Sometimes I wish I could do it in the real world.
Well, Michael, you're conscious of it. So that's the first step, isn't it? If you're conscious, you can change something. If you shine the light of consciousness onto something, then that's the first step in changing it. If you're unconscious, there's no way you can change it. So that's a great first step.
Yeah, and the idea of, as I said, sometimes I'm thinking about, while you're talking, I'm thinking about what I want to say, and I want to make sure I won't forget what I want to say. So I'm waiting for you to stop to finish what you're saying, so that I could start saying what I want to say. But I'm worried that I'll forget it. So now I'm not listening to you because I'm worried about forgetting what I was thinking. So now I can see how I'm developing the ability to do both at once. I'm listening and I'm thinking about what I want to say, and it gets more and more complex. And it's like a muscle. You could develop it.
Yes, it's important, I think, to be conscious of two basic human traits which get in the way a lot of good communication. And one of them is behind what you just said, which is looking good. We all want to look good. We want to sound intelligent. We want to impress the other person and so forth. And if that becomes the driving force, then you would spend all your time thinking about your brilliant next bit of speaking, and what the other person's saying is almost irrelevant. And it's the same if you're doing public speaking, for example, which I've done, many times, from the TED stage to, audiences as big as 11,000 people. It's not about you. If you go on stage and it's all about trying to impress people, that is guaranteed to fail. What it's about is giving them a gift. It's about what can you give to those people. And that's where I talk about the four foundations of powerful speaking, being HAIL, which is an acronym, stands for honesty, which is to say being clear and being straight in what you say, not trying to impress people with big language, not being devious, manipulative, and so forth. The A is authenticity, being yourself. And it's wonderful to be yourself. I mean, you've just shared stuff about who you are. I think this is a great thing to do, to be honest and transparent with people. It's so much easier as well than pretending somebody that you're not in order to impress them. The I is integrity, which is being your word. If you say it, you do it. And if people know that's true, then your words have got real weight. And the L, which is what I was just talking about, is love. Actually, that is to say wishing people well and giving them a gift. So it's the gift of your attention, if you're listening, and the gift of something that's going to be useful or valuable to them if you're speaking, and not about simply you looking good. And incidentally, just in case I forget, the other human trait that really gets in the way of good communication, even more than looking good, being right. The American author Harville Hendrix said you can either be right or be in a relationship. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
We'll get obsessed with being right, and it's not a productive way to be in life. And you can have two people being right with different opinions or points of view. It's fine. They have different perspectives. But we get into this confrontational thing of I'm right, you're wrong. The easiest way to be right is to make somebody else wrong, of course, which is why we have all this judgmentalism, addiction to outrage in the media. Who's to blame? The guilty party must be punished. We get into this because if there's a guilty party, I'm right, they're wrong, and that elevates me and makes me feel better about myself. So we need to watch out for that one as well.
Definitely. I wanted to ask you, there's something I noticed with the guests on this show. 80% of them behave in a certain way and 20 don't. Now, the way that the 80% behave in is when I listen to what you're saying and I wait until, there's an opportunity for me to say something. And I do it with all of them. But as soon as I start talking like I'm doing now, you see, I'm talking, but you are not talking over me. You're just listening to me. 80% of them talk over me. As soon as I start expressing myself, and they shut me up. And I'm like, why on earth are they doing that? And 20% are like you, or even less, I'd say 10%. They will not talk over me no matter what. They'll just wait patiently until I finish saying what I wanted to say, as you are doing right now. And I have no idea why the 80% talk over me. Any idea?
Well, it's a similar ratio to the ratio of my TED Talk on speaking to my TED Talk on listening, isn't it? Interestingly, 5-1, 4-1. And it doesn't surprise me because we are kind of taught very much to be out there, and especially with social media, which I call personal broadcasting. Life becomes a lot about sending people, tweeting away. I'm on a train. Who cares? There's this fantasy that there's thousands of people out there hanging on our every move and word. Guys, I have to break it to you. There aren't. When you tweet, it might be seen, unless you're, David Beckham or Barack Obama or somebody. When you tweet, it's probably seen by about 2 people, if you're lucky. And it's just a waste of time. It's a complete, but there's this fantasy that it makes me feel important to let everybody know what I'm doing. So it's sending. Now, it's interesting. You could really see sending, speaking, as a more masculine sense or behavior, listening more as a feminine behavior. Listening is receiving. Sound goes into your ears. It actually touches you inside your head. You're receptive. So it's not about, outward force. It's about inward reception. So in terms of, yin and yang and so forth, I would say sound is definitely more of a feminine and soft sense. And possibly in our competitive world where, you've got to struggle and, elbow yourself to the front so often, maybe that whole thrust is making us more interested in sending. I think have a look at Susan Cain's great TED talk on the power of introverts and how we value people who are loud and gregarious and out there generally more than we do people who are quiet and reserved and, like to read and be on their own. But each has an enormous role to play in the world. And look at what Gandhi achieved. He was not a loud man.
Yeah. By the way, you just reminded me of another thing I noticed is to do with frequency. I think that's the word. Some people, I interview them and they talk a load of rubbish. I'm like, who would want to listen to this? But they're like, blah, 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 blah. Really shallow stuff. And I'm like, no one's going to watch this. And I'm shocked. Thousands of people watched it and loved it. And the person I didn't understand what they were saying. There was no logic behind the words. It wasn't even interesting. But the way she said it, the way it sounded, spiritual and these big words and da, 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 blah, blah, blah. What the hell is that?
Well, I can't comment because I don't know who you're talking about or what they said. But I am very into the power of good speaking and the power of thinking carefully about what you say and saying things that are worthwhile saying. And if they're not worthwhile, generally not saying them at all. So it's a fairly simple message, I think. Words are very, very powerful and we need to use them carefully. And there's nothing wrong with taking your time and thinking a little bit about what you're saying. I don't use filler words very often. People always remark on that. You haven't said once or whatever it is, or you know what I mean. Those are just habits. And if you take a moment, and I'm like, and he's like, and it's like, and or so is in my particular bugbear with people starting every sentence with the word so these days. Don't get me started on language inflation. It used to be okay to be excited. Now you've got to be super excited, haven't you? And pretty soon I'm sure we'll have to be hyper excited or mega excited or super duper excited or something. I think it's very important to say what you mean and mean what you say. And it's a great practice actually to attempt at least to remove the hyperbole in our speech. We litter our speech with hyperbolic terms. It's fantastic. It's amazing. And the big one, of course, from America, awesome. But if a pair of trainers is awesome, how do you describe a sunset that just stops you in your tracks? We've lost the word. And I think that's a bit sad. So I'm a big fan of speaking carefully and being conscious of the power of the words that you're using.
Yeah. So I'll just finish by saying, this subject, what I realized is that the sound, and it brings us back to the beginning of our conversation, that somebody might be saying things that are not that interesting, but the sound of it, of his voice, of his passion, of the way he's saying it, and his looks and his movements, but especially the sound of it is captivating. And people might not be. I could have somebody listen to that other person, this charismatic speaker, and the person listening might not be able to repeat one sentence, but they'll say, I loved it. It was amazing. So that's what I meant.
Well, that's true. I actually asked that question to Chris Anderson, the head of TED. I said to him, what's more important, content or delivery? And he said, well, they're both important, of course, but given a choice, if I had to choose, it would be content, because I will bear with somebody who's saying something that's earth-shatteringly important or life-changing, even if they're saying it very poorly. On the other hand, if somebody is speaking vapid nonsense but doing it brilliantly, that's just annoying. And I think that's absolutely right. ultimately, both are very, very important. And I train people on both, and my book is about both, and the TED Talks cover both. But given a choice, you want to make sure that what you're saying is worthwhile saying. And as I said earlier, if it's not worthwhile saying, then perhaps don't say it.
Absolutely.
Nothing wrong with a bit of silence in the world. Silence is a very good thing to get acquainted with.
Indeed. So we've just discussed in depth the skills of listening and speaking. However, some people confuse these skills and they consider them to be capabilities, while you refer to them as skills. So how do they affect our lives, and why do you say they are capabilities and not skills? What's the difference? Please clarify.
Well, there are only three things at stake, I think, in terms of how good you are at speaking and listening. And those three things are quite important. It's your happiness, your effectiveness, and your well-being. All three fundamentally affected by how well you listen and how well you speak. And the reason for that is that this is how you relate to people. This is how we achieve anything in life. I mean, if you look at the picture behind me, that's a stone circle up here in Orkney called Ring of Brodgar. It's quite famous. It's possibly the first stone circle ever constructed in Europe. Now, when I go there, which I do quite often, I always think somebody back then, 5,000 years ago, must have been a rather good speaker, don't you think? Because somebody said, guys, what we're going to do is we're going to drag these huge rocks miles and miles using only seaweed to lubricate them across rough ground. It'll take decades to do this. People will die and be maimed in the process. And we're going to make this big stone circle. How about it? Well, could you or I do that? I doubt it. And how many people listening to this have made anything that's going to be there in 5,000 years? But somebody did. And that's the power. So legacy, outcomes, achieving what you want to achieve, making a difference in the world, whatever it is, guys, that you want to achieve in the world, maybe being a great parent. Listen, speak carefully. That's, so much at the heart of great parenting. I shudder when I think of that old Victorian adage, children should be seen and not heard, just the damage that did to so many people. So parenting requires great communication skills, listening and speaking. I love it when I see parents talking to their children who go down to their level to meet them eye to eye, not looming over them from 4 feet above them. So, listening to children is a wonderful thing to do. Teaching people, leading people in any enterprise. How can you lead people if you don't listen to them and understand them? And if you can't speak powerfully and inspire them? So these skills are fundamental in achieving your outcomes and in not feeling repressed and unhappy. It's very frustrating to be inarticulate, or the biggest complaint I get when people come to do my work is I can't get people to listen to me. People don't take me seriously. I'm in meetings and people talk over me the whole time. Those kind of experiences are frustrating, and they leave you ill at the end because you feel depressed and not worthy and so forth. So happiness, effectiveness, and well-being, all fundamentally affected by these skills, and they are skills.
Not
your voice is a capability. Your voice is a capability, but how you use it. This instrument we all play, the human voice, it's remarkable. And yet I hear so many people speaking these days with vocal fry, like this. And it's just a very lazy way to speak and not very nice to listen to, just growling in the throat like that. Or people who speak up here in their head and they really don't understand the fact that this is actually it's robbing them of power because, we take deep voices more seriously. And that's because large things have deeper sounds, naturally. Elephant, you need to take more seriously than a mouse. And deep means take it seriously. So we vote for politicians with deeper voices, other things being equal. If you want to practice on that, everybody listening, put your hand on your sternum, that's your chest bone, and practice until you can resonate it. You can really feel the vibrations in your hand on your chest bone. Can you hear how different my voice is now?
Yes, I can.
As opposed to up here in the head when I'm not resonating it at all. So it's a lighter voice, and there's nothing wrong with a light voice from time to time. And pitch, when we're on Zoom, in Zoom calls, the only meme I've seen on Zoom calls, the only etiquette there is of Zoom calls is at the end, everybody goes, bye.
Yeah.
So sometimes your voice goes high to indicate you're nice and you wish everybody well or whatever, like we do with babies. Oh, look at you!
Yeah.
That kind of soothing voice. So
Where's
the key
Julian?
again.
Say hello to Julian.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I have a 2-week-old baby at the moment. Well, not quite two. She's -1 actually at the moment. So I'm getting that completely wrong. She's 7 weeks old, but she was born 8 weeks early, so she's still -1 week.
Wow. How wonderful. Is that your first
she's great.
child?
No, fourth. But,
wow. You must be a rich man.
I wish. Maybe once. Not anymore.
Yeah, with all the kids. Wow. Yeah. So what are the 4 foundations of powerful speaking?
Well, I mentioned them earlier, Michael. HAIL, honesty, authenticity, integrity, and love. Those are the 4 foundations of powerful speaking in my work.
I see.
And if you stand on those 4 things, you won't go far wrong, generally.
Okay. So how does the Vocal Toolbox help us to use our voice powerfully and optimally?
We've mentioned a couple of the things. I go through the Vocal Toolbox. I'm going to be doing a webinar on this, I think, next week. So anybody who wants to find out this in detail, do pop by my website and sign up for that. And we'll be putting out, I think, materials about that in a day or two. There are lots of things in the Vocal Toolbox. This is an instrument. When you think of everything from Pavarotti to, Martin Luther King, the way the human voice can influence people, inspire people, move people, touch people is extraordinary. And most of us don't scratch the surface of what our voice is capable of because we've never been trained. I stand on stage talking to audiences of like 2,000 CEOs. I've done that in Denmark a couple of times. And I say to them, okay, how many of you speak in public? 2,000 hands go up. How many of you have had vocal training of any kind? 10 people out of the whole audience. Boggles my mind. So important to them, and yet they've never had it trained, the human voice. And most people haven't. So it is really, really important to use this to its fullest capacity. If you've got a voice that's squeaky, for example, I mean, one of the tools in the toolbox I talk about is timbre, which is the feel of your voice. Most people would say they like a voice that you describe the same way you describe a hot chocolate: rich, dark, warm, smooth, sweet, all those kind of things. And you've got a very good voice, Michael. And so, naturally, because you're on TV, or vice versa, you're on TV because you've got I don't know which way around it goes. But, so if you've got a little squeaky voice, like this is a bit raspy, it's not the end of the world. You can get vocal training and they will teach you how to relax your throat, because most of that would come from a tense throat, from tension somewhere in the mechanism that's creating your voice, how to use your diaphragm, how to breathe effectively, how to project, and how to make the most of the equipment you've got. Not everybody can sound like, James Earl Jones or whoever it might be that you aspire to sound like, because we've all got different equipment with different sizes. We have different shaped heads, different resonating chambers and so forth. But you can certainly make the most of what you have been given. So timbre is just one of the tools. There are lots of others. Pace, the space, using silence well. Prosody, one of my favorite ones, which is the intonation you use and the stresses that you put onto words. Very different in different cultures, incidentally, enormously different. So I always find, I've been to Israel, and I found that people there, to my English ear, always sounded like they were having an argument. But that's just the way people speak there. Yep. It's kind of definitive and it's very assertive and so forth. Same with Greece. I mean, if I ever go to Greece and I hear two people talking, I think they're having a flaming row and they're just having fun. So different prosody. On the other hand, if you go to Finland or the Nordic countries, where prosody is much more restrained, and it goes like this. We're very excited about this. So they're very, very restrained. You need to know what you're speaking into. You need to know the cultural listening that you're speaking into in order to be effective. And it changes from culture to culture, from person to person. But again, by practicing it, working on it, even somebody who's got a very monotonic voice like this, who generally wouldn't be a very good speaker, can work on it and become better.
Yep. Practice leads to perfection.
Always.
Okay. So what about the 7 deadly sins of speaking?
Yeah, that's a little device that I put into my last TED Talk to alert people to some of the things that really damage communication and I think are quite destructive in the world. So I don't know if we want to go through them exhaustively at the moment, but I'll give you a couple of prime picks out of there. I mean, they're all in that TED Talk as well. So, for example, exaggeration. I talked about hyperbole earlier, and exaggeration is very, very common these days. I mean, I just said very, very common. So that's a piece of exaggeration, if you like. Hyperbolic speech is almost addictive. And we can get into the habit more and more and start claiming things that are not quite true. You know, Solzhenitsyn, oh yeah, he's very good, isn't he? When I've never read it, you know, just to look better. Looking good is behind a lot of this. But that can turn into out and out lying, and we really don't want to listen to people we know are lying. So it is to be looked out for. And I'm a great fan, as I said earlier, of saying exactly what you mean. And the other one I'll pick out is dogmatism, which is so rife in the world now, tragically. People confusing opinions with facts. They are two different things. You know, today is Tuesday as we record this. That's a fact. Well, there are many opinions. You know, England is the best football team in the world. A lot of people would argue about that now, but it's not a fact. It's an opinion. And whatever evidence I mount, it is still controvertible. It's an opinion. And if we know the difference between those two things, it can defuse and remove a lot of table thumping and even violence, because a huge amount of violence comes from people who believe their opinions are facts and who won't tolerate alternative opinions. And that's, to me, tragic. You know, it's a long, slippery slope of intolerance, really, from caricature. You know, dogmatism tends to lead to caricaturing other people, depersonalizing them. And ultimately, at the bottom of that slope, you get the kind of ISIS way of doing things, which is, if you disagree with me, I'll kill you. And that is not a world I want my little daughter to grow up in, actually. So to me, listening is the secret to unpinning all these things, to getting rid of them. Listening, conscious listening, always creates understanding. And that's got to be the future of the world.
I'm wondering if I may ask something that just occurred to me. As someone who lived in England for many years, 16 years or more, 26 years, and now I live in Israel and also speak Russian, and I've noticed different, ways of behaving and speaking. Now, the English behavior, like being very English and proper and polite, and not proper. I mean, the being polite. Yeah. So, a lot of people, in England talk like, hi, oh, wonderful. I love it. Oh, brilliant. How lovely. Oh, love. That's absolutely amazing. Oh, I really like it. And all this kind of talk, you know what I mean? I mean, that's outright lying, as you just said, or exaggerating. My God, if that's not exaggerating, then what is?
Well, I did say when I talked about Hale on the TED stage, honesty is very important, but not unfettered honesty, not as in, oh dear, you look terrible today. Perhaps not. I mean, do you need to say that to somebody? So I think it's got to be tempered with love. And that's the most important thing, actually. So a lot of the English frothy stuff, which admittedly is largely exaggeration or whatever, I wouldn't want to get rid of that necessarily if it's coming from love, kindness, what Buddhists would call loving kindness, well-wishing to somebody else, seeking to make somebody else feel happy or better, giving them a gift of some kind. That's nice. Yeah. And I think we can tolerate a bit of exaggeration. So with the 7 deadly sins, I did say in the talk, and I say it repeatedly in my work, these are not things to be banned. I'm not saying they're evil. I'm simply saying if they're habits that become prevalent in your communication, they make you harder to listen to. That's all it is. So if you exaggerate all the time or much of the time, then people will start to discount what you say. That kind of froth, I think, is largely harmless. And if it's well-meaning, that is the most important thing of all.
Fair enough. I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. So perhaps now you could show us exercises for developing listening and speaking skills.
Well, I'll give you a couple in the time that we've got left. For listening, I really urge everybody to engage with silence. Now, I know that's not always possible, particularly if you're in a densely populated area and a noisy city, but it is really valuable. So if you have to go into a bathroom or even a cupboard or your bedroom, just reacquaint yourself with silence for a few minutes, as often as you can in a day, maybe 2 or 3 times in a day. 3 minutes of silence. It's very good for you. You meet yourself a little bit and you reset your ears, you recalibrate them, and you can listen afresh after that. So that's a really good exercise for listening. There are others in my TED Talk, in my book, and so forth. It's a long road, and these are simple exercises which, if practiced over and over again, will really transform your ability to listen to other human beings. But for now, silence is a great start. Being conscious of listening to that silence. In terms of speaking, well, I would say my vocal warm-up exercise is probably the best and most important thing to do if you're going to have an important thing to talk about. And those involve breathing. So first of all, lifting your arms up and sighing out. So with me, Michael. So that's just opened your ribs. You may not have taken a deep breath today until that point.
The second, lovely! How amazing!
How very English. The second and third are for the lips. So we start by going bo, 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 bo. That's it. Bo, bo. So there's kind of like press ups for the lips, and then the other one for the lips is what you did as a child if you were cold, which is to go. That's it. Well, that's a very short one, but you can do it as long as you like. Yep. So now your lips are probably awake, and then there's 2 for the tongue. The first is to say la, going right from the back of your palate to the front of your mouth, very exaggerated. So la, 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 la. That wakes your tongue up. And the other one that really wakes your tongue up, not everybody can do this, it took me months to learn, is to roll an R. Exactly. Now your tongue is really awake, and you can probably feel the difference. Your mouth feels alert and alive, and it's there to support you, which is rather important if you're about to walk on stage or do a TV program, I would suggest. And then the final one, which is the one I will do if I haven't got time to do them all. This is the one I will do if I can. And I've even done it in the front row of an auditorium while people are applauding the previous speaker when I haven't been able to find a quiet space. But a quiet space is better because it makes a noise. Is called the siren. It comes from the acting profession. It goes we or, where we is as high as you can go and or is as low as you can go. So it's kind of like a sine wave. So here we go. Like that. And I don't know if you want to have a go at that, Michael. Excellent work. And you'll probably find that your voice has pitch shifted down a tone after doing that, because it also reveals any discontinuities in your voice. So those are vocal warm-ups, which are very good to do if you're going to speak in public or even, propose marriage and you want your voice to be in its tip-top condition. And there are plenty of other exercises in my work. And by the way, if people come by the website, juliantreasure.com, there's a free download of a video, which I think is about 20 minutes long. And that's me and a top American speaker coach called Neil Gordon dissecting my top 10 TED Talk and, asking the question, why was this so successful? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Why did it work so well? And there's a wealth of all sorts of really useful tips in there for anybody who ever speaks in front of people at all.
Excellent. Wonderful. Splendid. What can I say? I mean, it's been amazing. I mean, we've discussed all these subjects thoroughly. And now we are approaching the very final stage of the interview, which is the dramatic stage where you are asked to please address your fellow sisters and brothers around the world directly from the bottom of your heart with a suggestion, request, or demand, or any kind of unique message you would like to give them. So, Julian Treasure, the stage is yours. Go ahead, please.
Well, my plea is to listen consciously. And if you want to do that immediately, you're probably all working from home still, but if wherever you are, the next conversation you have with somebody, put everything down, give them 100% of your attention, and seriously listen to them. Now, you might get the response from them, "What are you doing?" Because they're not used to it. We don't do a great deal of that in life, but it is such a great gift to give to people. Most of all, please realize that listening is a skill, and take on that it's a skill that you can master and one which will give you enormous benefits in your life from this moment on. So listen.
What a wonderful message, and what an amazing interview. I've enjoyed every moment of it, and all I could do is say thank you very much, Julian Treasure.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant, and good luck with everything else that you are working on. Thank you, and to our lovely viewers, thank you for watching. I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. All the links to Julian's website are going to be below this interview so that you could go there and learn more. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next interview. Goodbye now.